from Pennsylvania is recognized.
I reserve.
Okay, then I will yield 1 moment to the Majority Leader, Mr. Hoyer.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania, the gentleman from Maryland is recognized. The Majority Leader is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First of all, I rise in strong support of this resolution. It makes in order that we will not discriminate against people based upon their religion or the state from which they come, the nation from which they come. It says not at our cost, but at their cost, they have the right to consult counsel. That seems to me a basic premise in America. And then thirdly, which we hear so much lamentation about, gives to 700,000 plus people in the District of Columbia equal status with the 500,000 people in Wyoming. How terrible. Now, perhaps if my friends from the other side of the aisle, Madam Speaker, thought that there were going to be 2 Republican senators elected, they'd be for it. I say perhaps, but I believe there's no doubt about that. I am proud to be a strong supporter of that legislation. And I will tell my Republican friends who talk about human rights around the world so often, properly so, that Washington, D.C. is the only capital in the free world whose residents do not have a representative in the parliament of their country. The only one. There is no reason why the gentlelady who sits in front of me, Eleanor Holmes Norton, who's an extraordinary American, an extraordinary patriot, who served her nation so incredibly well and is elected by those 700,000 people, why she is less than we. Because Eleanor Holmes Norton cannot vote on final passage of a bill. Now, I did, as Majority Leader, at least give her the respect and respect of others who are representatives of their particular areas, Puerto Rico, American Samoa, Guam, the Northern Marianas, the right to vote in the Committee of the Whole. To let them know, at least in that small way, we wanted to give voice to the folks they represent. So I rise in strong support of this rule. We passed these bills before. Republicans opposed them before, and they'll oppose them again. I'm not surprised. Madam Speaker, before I sit, however, I want to speak about another issue. We are expecting the Republican leader to offer a privileged resolution at the conclusion of the debate on this rule. I'm disappointed at that news. His resolution is being used by Republicans to posit a moral equivalence between a comment by the gentlelady from California standing up for justice and peaceful protest and remarks by Representative Green, who directly threatened violence by retweeting a tweet. I understand it was not her words, but she retweeted those words, which said that if you want to shut Pelosi up, a bullet to the head will accomplish that objective. She didn't say it. I want to make that clear. She retweeted a tweet that said that. Even more egregiously, it is being used to twist reality to suggest that somehow Congresswoman Waters' remark is a condemnable remark as rhetoric that incites a violent attempt to overthrow the government of the United States on January 6th, an action that Republicans refuse to condemn. No, it will not. There is no equivalence. Chairwoman Waters' remarks reflect the very profound anger and sense of hopelessness that she and so many others, myself included, feel when we see African Americans being killed during encounters with our law enforcement and their families not seeing justice. It's my understanding we're going to get a ruling almost perhaps any minute. We will see. It is, however, irresponsible to take Chair Waters' remarks out of context to just hold a gotcha partisan vote, particularly when no action was taken by her party, regarding Ms. Greene's remarks. It is, frankly, exploiting the pain of so many families and communities to turn Chairwoman Waters' concern for justice into a partisan cudgel. Say some groups' biggest fear. Confront is not to say be violent in confronting the facts and the truth and the opportunities and the challenges. And yes, the alternatives that we'll take. And so if one of us stands up and said, we need to confront this, and we need to be confrontational, we need to get up in people's face and say, this is the truth and we need to act. And that would be subject to admonition. Then I suggest to my friend, Madam Speaker, and my friends in this House, that we all confront. We came here to represent people and to confront their needs, to confront their fears, to confront their wants. Now, yes, you could say, well, that's advocacy. Of course it is. And so I ask my friends not only to vote for this rule, but to vote for the motion to table of my friend's motion that I anticipate. We could spend all our time here, Madam Speaker. We've been on this side of the aisle, as my friend, the leader, knows. We haven't had all the resolutions that have been introduced on my side of the aisle. This makes it harder, however, not to proceed on numerous resolutions on my side of the aisle. Let us table this resolution on behalf of this institution and every member in it. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Maryland reserves.
reserve.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would just like to confirm that my colleague across the aisle has no further speakers.
But we have no further speakers and we're prepared to close, and I would reserve.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm prepared to close, and I'd yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's interesting to hear my colleague from Maryland's newfound positions, because in the 90s, I believe the majority leader actually had the opposite viewpoint and took the opposite vote. But then again, things can change and so can opinions. It's also interesting to hear my colleagues on the other side of the aisle use DC's population as some justification for DC statehood. We know that the founding fathers knew that DC would grow into a large metropolis. George Washington, when he was laying out this city, when he was laying out the land use of the city, actually used Paris as the example for this city, which was at the time 800,000 residents. They used one of the biggest cities in Europe as an example of this city because they knew that the District of Columbia would grow into a thriving metropolis. Yet they still wanted to carve out DC as an independent district, not as a state. The argument that there are now 700 some residents of DC is a non-starter if you're going back to the historical intent of the founding fathers. But let's talk about the border crisis. There has been a 400% increase in illegal border crossings compared to March 2020, 400%. Yet today, we're considering a rule bringing up 2 immigration bills that do absolutely nothing to address this crisis. And again, we're calling up a rule, HR 51, that is the Democrats' attempt, an unconstitutional attempt to ram through DC statehood for their own political gain. And what is that gain? It's very simple. It's bringing in 2 ultra-liberal senators. DC is the most liberal city, second only to San Francisco, bringing in 2 ultra-liberal senators into the Senate with the idea of abolishing the filibuster, and to what end? To pack the Supreme Court to ram through a far-left radical agenda. For those reasons, Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to vote no on the previous question and no on the underlying measure. Thank you, and I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let me start with this. The majority leader hardly needs me to defend him, but I know that he was a strong supporter of the DC voting rights constitutional amendment, where there was actually bipartisan support. In those days, Republicans understood the grievous injustice being perpetrated against people in Washington, D.C., and they supported granting people in D.C. 2 senators, or what my colleague would call 2 ultra-liberal senators, as well as the representatives in the House to which they were due. So there were certainly people who were saying there were other ways of accomplishing it. Now, unfortunately, that bipartisan consensus collapsed, even though it passed the Senate and the House back in the day. I don't hear any of my colleagues saying they're for it now. So Mr. Hoyer, the majority leader, is supporting the only viable vehicle for getting equal rights for people in Washington, D.C. that exists today, which is statehood, which is how 37 new states entered the Union with Congress's exercise of its powers under Article 4 of the Constitution. The gentleman waxes eloquent about the vision of a great capital city, but being a strict textualist, I assume that he wants to pay some attention to the text of the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, the District Clause sets a maximum, a ceiling, that the district may be no more than 10 miles square, but there's no minimum there. It didn't say it must be at least 6 miles square or 2 miles square or 3 miles. No, that's up to Congress. In other words, it's a political question within congressional power, our plenary power over the District of Columbia. Now, finally, the gentleman, I suppose, gets to the heart of the matter when he says that for him, it's all about 2 ultra-liberal senators. And I would ask every member of this body to think about that for a second, reflect about that. Because in America, I don't think we deny people voting rights based on how they're going to vote. I don't think we deny entire states and political communities representation based on predictions of who they might elect. In fact, there's a Supreme Court case about that called Carrington versus Rash, when armed service members in Texas were disenfranchised because it was suggested that they would vote in a way more identified with the national government than with local cultural values in Texas.
Still hold, because we technically will still be waiting for the outcome at this point. The only thing is, if you have
than with local cultural values in Texas.
still hold, because we technically will still be waiting for the outcome at this point. The only thing is,